Sometimes life doesn't ask permission to enter your door. It simply bursts in, loudly, boldly, like a bullet that pierces the silence. Frame Selleck never considered himself lucky, quite the opposite. He was one of those people who age early from the worries that life brings and from the blows that don't let you catch your breath. But even if he had wanted to be ordinary, fate would not have allowed it. It seemed to have chosen him, not for fame, not for wealth, but for an endless trial. How many times can a person die and remain alive? Frane was born in 1929 in Croatia, when it was still part of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. A small village not far from the city of Dubrovnik, a stone house, the smell of olive oil, and the sea. He grew up in poverty, but in warmth. His mother baked bread, his father played the accordion. The neighbors knew each other by name. The war swept through the country when he was 12. He saw soldiers come and go, people disappear at night, and boys become men simply because there was no other way. Then he understood for the first time, life is not a gift, it's a chance. And not everyone gets it for long. After the war, he became a music teacher, then worked as a conductor on the railway. A modest man with a soft voice and quiet eyes. He loved the accordion, loved telling stories to children, laughed when the train went into a tunnel, as if disappearing into another life. But the first catastrophe awaited him precisely where he felt safe. It was 1962. January, cold as steel. Frane was traveling by train from Sarajevo to Dubrovnik. The carriage shook from the wind. The passengers dozed, tired, wrapped in coats. The train went along the mountains, through gorges where snowy fog hung over the abyss. He was thinking of his wife. She was waiting for him at home, with a warm dinner and the old lamp they liked to sit under in the evenings. Everything was familiar, calm, even sleepy. But suddenly something gave a dull click under the floor, as if the metal had split from the cold, and then the engineer's cry rang out. Frane only had time to lift his eyes. Sparks flashed before him, fire, someone's hands, and the carriage seemed to break in half. The train flew off the rails, slid down the embankment, and crashed right into the icy river. In an instant, everything filled with water, darkness, and screams. People floundered, struck against seats, grasped at the air. Frane felt the icy torrent strike his chest. He didn't remember how he swam out. He didn't remember how they pulled him onto the shore. He only remembered the sound, ghastly, scraping, the metal of the sinking train and the wail of people who could no longer be saved. He survived. 17 people drowned. He did not. He lay in the snow, shivering, coughing up water, and hearing his own heart beating like a drum. When they found him, he was smiling. Simply smiling because he was still breathing. People thought he had lost his mind, but he knew he was simply alive. After that, everything went awry. They started calling him the Lucky One, a funny word, although he felt rather chosen for suffering. A year later, he boarded an airplane for the first time in his life, a small domestic flight from Zagreb to Rijeka. The plane shuddered. It was cold. The old DC-3 groaned at altitude. Frane was afraid to fly, but wanted to see his sister. Everything was going normally until suddenly one of the engines stalled. The plane began to fall. Passengers screamed, someone prayed, someone grasped for air. A flight attendant lost her balance and struck the door, and the door tore off. At that moment, Frane didn't think. He simply acted. It was as if something pushed him. The door ripped away and he was thrown out. He was flying. The wind lashed his face. The ground grew beneath him. Below, cliffs, trees, rocks. He only had time to think, that's it. But no. Fate, as if playing, slipped him a straw mattress, a bus loaded with hay standing by the road. He crashed right into the haystack. He came to a few hours later, covered in blood and with a dislocation, but alive. The plane crashed in a gorge. All 19 passengers died. Only he survived. When the doctors asked him how he felt, he said, "Better than yesterday." And he laughed. But the laughter was nervous. He felt as if life were mocking him. As if someone above were watching, flipping a coin, and each time it landed on its edge. Time passed. Frayne got married, worked, traveled by buses. Buses seemed safer to him than airplanes and trains, until one of them went off the road into a river. He was inside. Everything happened just as suddenly. A slippery road, a mountain turn, the driver shouted, and the bus plunged into the water. People floundered. Glass shattered. Water flooded the cabin. Frayne smashed a window and swam out. The others did not. He once again remained alive. People began to whisper, "Cursed, chosen, death won't take him." He tried not to listen, but inside grew a strange feeling, as if he were no longer just a person, but something like a test for fate. He wanted peace, but received trials. Once, a couple of years later, he was walking down the street when a bus drove past. He turned his head, and at that moment a fire hydrant, blown off by pressure, exploded. The stream of water threw him aside. He was lucky that a wall stood nearby to take the blow. If not for it, he would have been swept under the wheels. He stood up, dusted himself off, and said, "Thank you, Lord. But maybe that's enough." He was 41. He had already gotten used to something trying to kill him every few years, but he still got up in the mornings, shaved, drank coffee, and went to work. He wasn't afraid of death. He was afraid of the next miracle. In the early 1970s, he was driving his old car. On a mountain road, something went wrong. The engine caught fire. Frayne jumped out. A second later, the fuel tank exploded. The car blew apart in flames. He stood to the side, burned, but alive. Passers-by looked at him in horror. It seemed even the devil himself was guarding this man. A few years later, another accident. A truck veered into the oncoming lane. Impact. Frayne's car slammed into the barrier, but instead of dying, he flew through the windshield right into a snowdrift. The car exploded. He sat in the snow and laughed. Not from joy, from madness. "Am I immortal?" he asked himself, looking at the fire reflected in the ice crystals. After that explosion, Frayne stopped laughing. He began to wonder why all this was happening. Maybe it was payback for something. Maybe God simply forgot to turn off the protection over him, and now it triggered at random. Each time he thought that, now it was definitely the end, and each time he opened his eyes. He told his friends, "I no longer feel pain. I feel anticipation." Anticipation of the next time. By the late 70s, life seemed to have settled down. He lived in Zagreb, taught music, collected old records. His wife would sometimes joke, "Don't go far or a meteorite will fall on you." He smiled. But somewhere deep inside he understood. It could happen. The 1980s brought calm. He even decided that perhaps the curse had passed. He began to grow old, walk more slowly, get sick more often, but there were no catastrophes. Almost 15 years of silence. And then in 1995, he was in an accident again. Frayne was driving along a mountain road when an oncoming truck skidded. He swerved to avoid a collision, and the car went off a cliff. Everything happened in silence, like in a dream. The car fell, somersaulted, metal bent, sparks flew, and suddenly a halt. He flew out of the cab through the window, right onto the branches of a tree. The tree slowed the fall, and he, all in blood and glass, hung on it. The car exploded below. He climbed down the trunk and, limping, went to the road. No one believed it when they saw him alive. The doctors at the hospital, accustomed to tragedies, joked, That's no longer a man, that's a talisman on legs. But Frayne himself no longer joked. He didn't believe in chance. It seemed to him he was living in someone else's dream, where the script was broken. Every new day began with the thought, "And today will I wake up?" Time passed. The country changed. Yugoslavia collapsed, the world around filled with new fears, and he still lived, as if outside of time. When the Balkan Wars began, he was already an old man. People died around him, and he still stood off to the side, as if death ricocheted off him. He didn't want to take part, didn't want weapons, didn't want anything. "I've already been to hell," he said, "and I don't want to go back there." He lived alone. Sometimes he taught children music, sometimes he repaired instruments, sometimes he just sat by the window and looked at the road. He no longer traveled by trains, nor by buses, nor by airplanes. He rode only a bicycle. He said, "It's the only thing that hasn't yet tried to kill me." But even there, fate found a way. In the winter of 1996, he was riding his bicycle across a bridge. Frost, wind, thin ice. A car was coming toward him. The driver lost control. The car skidded, struck him tangentially, and he, together with the bicycle, flew into the river. But again, a miracle. His jacket caught on a tree overhanging the water. He hung by his sleeve, swaying over the current, until they pulled him out. "Lord," he said then, "if you need me for something, just tell me what for." By that time he had become a kind of legend. Newspapers wrote, "The man who cannot be killed." Journalists came to take interviews, photographed him next to the old Yugo, which had miraculously not exploded, laughed when he told the story about the airplane and the hay. He didn't like these conversations. He spoke simply, "I'm not a hero, I just didn't die." But perhaps this was the meaning of his life, to not die while the whole world tries to prove the opposite. He lived into the 2000s. He was already in his 70s then. He lived calmly, quietly, played the accordion, fed the cat, went to the market. And then one morning a journalist from a local newspaper called him. "Mr. Selleck, you've won the lottery." He thought it was a joke, but it was true. He won 1,000,000 kuna, about $1 million. After all the catastrophes, after all the miracles and fear, life suddenly decided to reward him, or to laugh one last time. He bought a house on the seashore, bought a boat, helped relatives, gave part of the money to friends. But a year later he gave away almost everything, to a monastery, a hospital, and to several poor families. When they asked him why, he said, "I lived too long between life and death to cling to paper. It's enough for me that I breathe." Once he sat on the terrace, looked at the sunset, and said to his neighbor, "I think death fears me more than I fear her." The neighbor laughed, but Frane wasn't joking. He spoke calmly, as if he had already made peace. "She always comes when I'm not ready, and each time she leaves with nothing. Maybe one day she will simply get tired." He died quietly, without catastrophes, without blood, without fire. He simply fell asleep and did not wake up. This happened in 2016. He was 87. The obituary read, "Frane Selleck, the man who could not be killed." But he himself once said, "I wasn't immortal. I simply knew that death doesn't always win." If someone were to make a film about him, then in the final scene they would show his face in the reflection of water. The wind ripples the surface, and in it, a life, the whole life lived on a knife's edge. Below, a river, the very one into which his first train fell. And somewhere there, in the depths, lies rusty iron, and above it, a man who swam out again. He became a legend not because he survived, but because he did not lose his sense of wonder at being alive. His story is not about a miracle. It is about resilience, about that strange strength that holds us when everything collapses. Sometimes he said, "I just wanted to live until morning," and each time he did. And perhaps in this lies true immortality. Not every person is born to fly, but there were times when the sky took everyone, both those who dreamed of it and those who simply wanted to survive beneath it. Vito Bertoldi did not dream of being a hero. He only wanted to breathe, to hear the sound of the wind, to feel the engine respond to the touch of his hand. He was a pilot not by calling, but by fate, as if someone already knew that one day the sky itself would give him the chance to pass between life and death. It was 1943. The Mediterranean breathed fire. Ships burned. Planes fell. Over the islands hung the smell of gasoline and salt. Vito was young, 26 years old, slim, dark-haired, with a face in which confidence and anxiety were mixed. He served in the Royal Air Force of Italy, flew a Savoia-Marchetti SM.79 bomber, a three-engined beast covered with noise and oil. For him, the sky was not a place of freedom, but a place of work. There he spent more hours than on the ground. He remembered that morning, cold, pale, with a wind from the southwest. They took off from an airfield near Naples, a routine mission, reconnaissance over the Adriatic area. The plane climbed slowly, as if lazy. The engines hummed dully. It smelled of fuel and sweat. Commander Bertoldi sat at the controls. Next to him, the gunner mechanic Giovanni. The silence between them was habitual. The sky does not like words. At an altitude of 6,000 meters, the air became thin. Fingers froze. Breath turned into steam. The cabin glass was covered with frost. But Vito felt calm. He knew this plane down to the last bolt. Everything went according to plan until the gunner leaned toward him and quietly said, "Look." Something metallic flashed on the horizon, a dot quickly growing in size, and before they could understand, an attack. Out of the clouds dived fighters, 3 Spitfires, the British. The first burst passed by. The second pierced the fuselage. The cabin filled with the smell of burning. The metal moaned, the plane trembled. Vito clenched the control column. Hold on. The engine began to smoke. Flames licked the skin of the aircraft, and suddenly an explosion. A wave of fire swept through the entire body. His ears were stuffed. Everything turned orange. The plane broke apart like a paper box. Vito did not understand how he ended up outside. The air tore him from the cockpit. The scream froze in his throat. He was falling, without a parachute, from 6 kilometers. The world turned into chaos. The sound of the wind was not just loud. It was alive, like a roaring beast wanting to burn his skin. The air beat against his face. His eyes would not open. He did not see the ground, only a white veil of clouds through which he flew like a stone. He tried to inhale, but his lungs would not obey. Time disappeared. He was not falling. He was suspended in eternity. At some moment he saw fragments of the plane, pieces of the wing, the tail, debris spinning nearby like satellites around his body. A piece of the cockpit flew past, hit his leg. Blood filled his boot. He screamed, but there was no sound. The wind swallowed it. Maybe 20 seconds passed, maybe a minute. It's hard to say when the earth beneath you is only an idea, not a fact. He thought of his mother, of how she told him before takeoff. Look at the sky, Vito, but remember that the earth always waits for you back. And suddenly that phrase became a prophecy. He broke through the clouds, and for the first time he saw the earth. Below, mountains covered with snow, white, uneven, twisted surface. Not a green plain, not sea, snow. He realized there was a chance. Falling, he spun like a body without a center of gravity. He was thrown side to side. The wind twisted him. His clothes tore. He tried to stretch his arms, as pilots were taught, to increase resistance, to slow the fall. It was almost meaningless. But a person clings even to an illusion if it gives a chance. He saw the mountains approaching, faster and faster. Below stretched a line of trees, Tall, dark firs, their shapes sharp as spears against the pale ground. He had only a moment to think. Let it happen. And then it did. The trees did not meet him all at once. First came the scent, sharp, resinous, almost alive. Then the branches appeared, countless and reaching from every side, pulling and slowing him as he fell. The descent became not a single impact, but a chain of rough, tearing motions, each one testing his strength and balance. Branches brushed across his arms and face, spinning him mid-air. His sleeve caught, fabric tore, and each moment of falling felt like sliding through a maze of wood and wind. A heavy jolt stopped his breath for an instant. The world flickered out, and then came motion again. Another snap, another rush of air. The roar of wind turned into the hiss of needles and the cracking of wood, and at last, through the noise, he heard his own voice, short, strained, almost surprised. The branches bent and gave way, slowing him little by little, giving him fragments of time to breathe. Something shifted inside his chest. He couldn't tell what, but there was no time to think. He turned face down and saw what lay below. The surface of snow. Icy grains sparkling like crushed glass. Faint blue roots tracing through the frozen earth. The final branches broke away, leaving nothing beneath him. One instant of weightlessness, and then the ground. The snow was deep, hardened by wind. It cracked under the impact with a low, muffled sound that rolled through the silence. He sank into it as into cold dust, air trembling around him. For a long moment, everything was still. Only his breath, quiet and unsteady, against the endless white. He jerked and realized he was lying face down in snow, his nose and lips in ice, and that if he breathed now, he would inhale ice. He did not inhale. A second of silence. Another. A third. Slowly, stubbornly, he moved his chin as if pushing a rock. The snow yielded a millimeter. Another millimeter. He turned his head to the side as if tearing it away from a cold slab and inhaled through his teeth. Air entered, burned his lungs with cold, and only then did he allow himself to cough, a dull cough muffled by snow. His right shoulder burned. The left responded with a dull, alien, wooden pain, a dislocation or tear. The knee, unclear. The fingers ached. But somewhere deep inside, beneath all these signals of pain, another sound went, quiet and metallic. Alive, alive, alive. He lay and listened to the forest. At first it was empty, without singing, without birds. Then from afar came a crack. From the tree he had fallen onto, clumps of snow were slowly falling. Somewhere farther away the crust crunched, maybe a beast, maybe a branch. The wind passed between the trunks like water in a narrow channel. He tried to move. The fingers of his right hand obeyed, the left as if they were gone. Slowly, by an imperial order of the body, he shifted the weight onto his right side and tried to free his left arm from the snow pit. The shoulder responded with a creak. Darkness clouded his eyes. He froze, waited. Carefully, as if from someone else's flesh, he pulled the arm along his body. It was there. It became his again, only as if set a meter aside. He inhaled. Again. He remembered the sky, how it turned over above him, how the clouds burst, how steel flashed. He remembered the explosion, the fire. He remembered the faces of the crew, Giovanni, the mechanic who loved to hum out of tune, the commander, stubborn as an oak. Their voices, their silence. He wanted to close his eyes, and didn't. Get up, he told himself, quietly, without strength. Get up, Vito. He bent his right leg, felt how the snow cavity under him collapsed. Slowly, almost inhumanly slowly, as if rearranging furniture in a house after a fire. He turned onto his stomach and, leaning his right hand on the snow, pushed himself to the surface. The world was whiter than he remembered. The sky was leaden, heavy, low. Between the trunks moved dusty snowfall, not a storm, no, just a wind strong enough to take warmth away. He rose to his knees. His head rang, the taste of blood, iron and salt. He inspected himself as he would inspect a damaged plane, quickly, by points. The jacket torn on the shoulders inside, belts, useless, boots, in place. Right glove, there. Left, lost among the branches. Shoulder, out. Ribs, 1, 2. The whole left side hurt. Neck could turn, so intact. He raised his gaze. Above him towered the tree, a black canopy beneath which he had just passed. On the branches hung scraps of fabric. A little further, a leather elbow pad wedged into a bough. Higher up, a dark spot. Blood? His? Probably. Even higher, on the edge of sight, something metallic glinted, a fragment of plating. Among the frost-dusted branches it looked absurd, alien. He tried to remember where they were when they were shot down. The Adriatic to the left, a mountain ridge ahead, altitude about 6,000. If these were the eastern slopes, then below lay ridges descending into forested valleys. The snow here, thick, enduring. Not far there should be a village, a weather station, an outpost, a forester's hut. Anything. War makes all maps dirty and inaccurate, but the forest always leaves traces. He stood. The world shifted sideways, as if earth, sky, and trees decided for a moment to change places. He took 2 steps and stopped so as not to fall. The cold became personal. It entered the clothes like into a home. The wind crept behind the collar, and where the pain burned, a trembling began to sing. He clenched his teeth. Breathe. Through the nose, slowly. Walk, in rhythm, not letting panic take command. "Hey," he said into the emptiness. The voice came out hoarse, old. "Hey!" The forest answered with silence, and then echo. His own "hey" returned to him like a stranger pretending to be a friend. He stood up and went on. The path downward turned steeper than it seemed. Several times he slipped, slid on one knee, caught balance with his shoulder, the left, and saw a salute of black stars before his eyes. Once he fell so that snow entered behind his collar and lay there like a cold hand. He didn't curse. He didn't speak at all anymore. He saved every spark of heat, every thought. Memory brought him different things. The smell of engine oil and hangars, the damp stone walls of barracks, Giovanni's laughter always joking about his wife, as if she were more real than war. The Sunday noise of the little market square at home, where he used to watch airplanes. The war made these pictures warm, ones to which you could press your palm. He pressed and walked on. After perhaps an hour, or maybe 20 minutes, time had blurred like wet paper. The forest began to thin. To the left appeared clearings. He came out on a small ledge. Below, in a hollow, lay a valley, and he heard what he wanted to hear more than anything in the world. Water. A stream, not a river, but water. And near the water, tracks. Not animal. Human. Old, clogged with snow, but the pattern of the sole visible. He crouched so his head wouldn't spin, and ran his fingers along the tread pattern like along a stave. A boot. not military or an old civilian model. Toes pressed inward, a heavy load. Direction? Downstream. He stood, followed the stream. The sun did not show, as if it had not been assigned for this day. The light was diffuse, damp. The sky hung low. The forest, which at the first pain had seemed an enemy, now became an accomplice. The trunks sheltered from the wind, the snow, angry, surrendered, allowed him to walk across its crust without every second step breaking through. The shoulder ached like an old wound awakened by winter. On some bend of the stream he leaned against a spruce trunk, closed his eyes for a moment, and immediately, "Hey!" he shouted, and his throat tore like glass. "Hey!" The barking grew closer. Voices, one, another. Italian? Dialect? He didn't understand the words, but heard the rhythm, recognizable. He took 10 more steps, carefully descended to a wide, snowed-over track where the snow was trampled by feet and sleds. From the bend of the path appeared a dog, a gray mongrel with a curled tail. It stopped, growled, sniffed the air. Behind it came a teenager in a woolen cap, an old coat 2 sizes too big, with a long stick in his hand. The boy froze. The dog barked hoarsely and stepped back. Vito raised his right hand, palm forward. "Don't come out," meaning, "I'm not dangerous." He opened his mouth and quietly said, "Don't shoot." It was funny, the boy didn't even have a gun. But war taught people to speak as if everyone had a finger on the trigger. The teenager looked at the torn jacket, the blood on the snow, the broken shoulder, and stepped closer. Voices behind him, female and male, also approached. Out of the turn came 2 adults, a short, broad-shouldered man wearing an animal skin over his jacket, and a woman in a dark scarf. They looked without fear, attentively, like at a broken tool that could still be fixed. "Fell from the sky," the man said, as if stating the weather. "We saw fire over the mountains." Vito nodded. His tongue suddenly became heavy like wet cloth. He didn't know what to say. Explain? Who he was? For them, just a man descended from the sky. That was enough. The man came closer, gently put a shoulder under his arm. "Let's go. It's not far." He said it as if everything was already decided, and Vito let the decision happen. The road to their house was short and long at the same time. Each step echoed in the left side of his body with a dark lightning. The man walked beside him springily. The dog circled like a shadow. The boy ran ahead to open doors, to stoke the stove, to call someone. The woman didn't ask questions, only from time to time looked back, checking if he was holding on. The house stood on the edge of the valley, wedged between 2 firs. Stone walls, wooden roof, bluish smoke. Inside, "Must set it," the woman said softly, "before it hardens." "I can," nodded the man. "Will you hold?" he asked Vito. He looked at them, 2 faces without unnecessary words. He nodded. The man poured something strong into a clay mug. The smell was familiar, moonshine. Vito took a sip, and fire went down his throat into his chest, pushing the cold aside. The man asked him to lie down. The woman sat at his head, took his right hand into hers, strong and warm. "Breathe," she said. "Look at me when he turns." The man took his left arm, at the elbow, and sharply, with the accuracy with which one negotiates with wood, turned and pushed back. The world flashed white. Vito jerked. A sound like a dry branch crackled through his shoulder, and suddenly it became easier. The pain stayed, large, lazy, like a beast by the hearth, but its poison left. The shoulder became part of the body again. "Next, cold and bandages," said the woman, and in her voice there was much winter and much summer. The skin's torn. We'll stitch it with what we have. The needle's dull, but we'll bear it." He nodded. Bearing he knew how. They worked together, like stokers, like craftsmen. They washed with snow, applied ointment made from herbs that she took from a small jar, stitched with rough stitches, applied splints from thin planks, and tightly bandaged. She said, "You'll survive. If you fell from the sky and still walk, you'll survive." He smiled, for the first time since he'd seen fire over the wing. That smile was thin, without teeth, but in it there was something unbreakable, like a nail driven into the right beam. That night he hardly slept. His body kept falling into darkness, then returning to the stove, to the crackle of logs, to the sound of someone's steps on the wooden floor. Behind the wall they spoke quietly, about snow, about the forester who needed to be told, about what they'd heard yesterday, someone shooting in the valley, someone seeing soldiers. The war was always here, only now it stood a little aside, gave space for another event. A man had fallen from the sky and remained alive. In the morning, he listened briefly. The questions were simple. Who are you? Where from? Where were you going? Why attacked? Vito answered as much as memory allowed beyond the edge of shock. He named the plane type, the board number, the direction. The forester wrote it down with a pencil on a piece torn from a paper sack. "We'll go," he said. "Need to check the valley. Maybe someone else is alive." He wanted to stand. The forester shook his head. "No, you stay here. I'll go. And I'll take the boy." He nodded to the teenager in the cap. "His legs light, his track thin, won't bring the snow down." While they were gone, Vito sat by the window. The snow was white, almost silent. The wind was gone today, and the forest stood like a dining set polished to a shine. He looked and listened, not to sounds, but to his own pulse, which had become even and steady. That's how an engine beats if tuned anew. They returned by evening. With them, silence and a colon on their faces. The forester placed a sack on the table. From it spilled out a watch on a strap with shattered glass, a silver cigarette case dented at the corner, a metal tag with numbers, the kind a pilot carries in his pocket, half a compass. The forester placed on the edge a small, wind-faded handkerchief with the embroidered letter G, Giovanni. "Found them?" Vito asked, though the answer was already on the table. "Wreckage, yes. People, no. Below, traces of burned snow. Bad place. A scree. Snow moves. If someone did get down, went along a trail that's now covered. Search, you'll freeze. We'll wait till thaw, or till spring." He understood. Understood that he wouldn't return to that valley, not because he didn't want to, but because war and snow had already decided. He took the tag, held it to the light. The numbers were clear, like hammer marks. He closed his eyes so that only those numbers remained in the dark. Someone's name, someone's life, gathered into a small oval. "I remember them," he said, more to himself than to the people in the room. "I remember all." Then began the days of recovery, not fast, not heroic. Sometimes neighbors came. They looked at him as at a miracle not miracle. War had taught people not to marvel aloud. They nodded and said, "Grazie a Dio," and moved on to talk about salt, hay, bread. But each, leaving, held his gaze a second longer, at the hand with large stitches, at the face that refused to break. A week later came those who were supposed to come, men in greatcoats without insignia, with narrow eyes. They said little, but enough to understand. They'd taken. First to the nearest post, then wherever told. He didn't resist. He was tired of one forest, but not tired of returning to Earth. He always returned. The road down was different. In a sleigh, under a cloak, with pain packed into the frame of tolerable. The snowy landscape gave way to rare huts, then a village where smoke rose from chimneys, and farther, a station smelling of fuel oil and iron. He was again near what he knew, people who decide where to fly when there's too much Earth. Doctors met him, silent, busy, with hands used to too much. An X-ray of the shoulder confirmed dislocation, rib fracture, bruising of internal tissues. Lucky. He smiled to the doctor. He didn't smile back, only nodded. Alive means lucky. Yes. In the next bed lay a boy with a shard that had grazed his neck. He whispered that all night he heard the sea in his ear. Vito listened and thought how strangely sound travels in the human body. Survival from 6,000 meters was spoken of in whispers, then louder. Some said impossible. Some, if forest, if snow, if branches. Phrases with if grow fast, like weeds. He didn't argue. He knew only one thing. In each if, there was a piece of decision. Branches took part of the blow. Snow, the rest. The body endured. The heart didn't let go. When he could walk unaided, they brought him out into the air. Not the sky, just air. Dry, with hints of smoke, with a thin trace of spring. He stopped on the hospital steps, breathed deeper, and for the first time allowed himself a long pause. The pause smelled of freedom. They gave him leave for a few weeks. He returned to Tuscany, where green hills and in the evening, Vito went out to the backyard. The sky was clear, a rarity, a gift. He raised his head. The stars were not low, they were far, as they should be, and in that proper distance was what he wanted to feel, the world returning to its place. He stood and listened to the muffled clatter of dishes from the room, to the rustle of the cat in the shed, to the faint sound of a train far away. All sounds from one world, his. But war doesn't release completely while it still goes on. A month later they came for him. No banners, no music, a simple truck, 2 men, and order. He packed his bag, put into it a new handkerchief, the same, embroidered, now his own. Kissed his mother on the temple. His father shook his hand. And he left. He was no longer allowed to fly until his shoulder healed, until they forgot how he had fallen. He was assigned to an airfield, to the technical section. He became one who knows the plane no worse than the sky, listened to engines, cleaned carburetors, tuned, tightened, measured. He did what he'd always known, returned things to order. And at night, lying on his cot, he sometimes felt his body falling into the forest again, the branches tying him back to the earth, and woke with a firm, clear, "I'm alive," on his lips. Once a young pilot came up to him, the same breed he himself had been a year earlier, sharp cheekbones, hungry gaze, laughter easily turning to a shout. "Signor Bertoldi, is it true that you, well, without—" He hesitated, as if naming something forbidden. "Without a parachute?" Vito looked at him, not down and not up, just straight. "True." "How?" He shrugged, with the shoulder that was whole. "Don't die before the ground, and let the ground not be stone." The youth laughed, taking it as a joke, but in that phrase was an instruction you couldn't put in a manual. Spread resistance, catch the branches, aim for snow, listen to your heart, face pain, because pause is a luxury the sky doesn't always give. Spring came, and war around changed pace. Fewer Italian wings in the sky, more foreign. On Earth, more. Vito returned home. Truly, with belongings, with a letter, with the silent feeling that he'd been given back to the earth again. Life after is never spectacular. It's precise. He became a mechanic, not at an airfield, on the ground. Repaired tractors, trucks, motorcycles. Learned to listen to metal as attentively as before. The sky. Married. Had a daughter. Stubborn. With a funny wrinkling of her nose. A son. Serious from childhood, as if knowing where his father had come back from. He didn't tell them details. Children don't like stories where the father disappears into the sky. But once his son asked, "Dad, did you ever fall from a tree?" He smiled. "I did, and not from one. Sometimes in winter, when the forest turned into the one he'd been in then, he took the family to the mountains. Not to that place, no. Forests change. Paths vanish. Maps lie. He just walked through the snow, listened to the crunch of crust, showed the children how to find dry branches under snow, how to tell a fox's track from a dog's, how to fool the wind by standing on its side. These were lessons not about war, about life, which sometimes pulls you by the collar and sometimes offers a shoulder. 10 years after the war, a journalist came to him, with a recorder, a new sound in his house, with a notebook full of questions. He asked them all, "What's it like to fall? What did you feel? What do you believe now?" Vito answered evenly, without embellishment. "What did I think?" he repeated. "Of my mother. Of how oil smells in the morning. Of how you must turn your palms to the wind. Do you believe in miracles?" "I believe in the forest, and in people who know how to set shoulders." The story grew over with retellings. Somewhere they wrote that he fell 7 minutes. Somewhere that clouds caught him like a soft pillow. Somewhere that he pushed off debris and glided like a bird. He didn't argue. People love legends. He loved silence. The truth was simple. Branches, snow, pain, steps downward. And people who said, "Come," instead of, "Who are you?" Sometimes he thought, what exactly saved him? With the years, he joked, "I'm the man whom the forest once accepted." There was accuracy in that. The sky hadn't given him to death, but to the trees, and the trees gave him back to people. He sometimes laid his palm on the rough board of the old table, running his fingers along it as over bark. It answered with warmth. In later years, when his hair turned gray and his shoulder echoed in bad weather with that old winter note, he still looked at the sky, not with longing, with gratitude. He didn't become a preacher, didn't build a temple, didn't wear medals. His reward was different. Every breath he took after that day was a gift. And every winter, when snow fell in thick layers on branches, he would fall silent and listen to how falling turns into silence. When once he was asked what the fall had taught him, he thought longer than usual. That we are not only the fall, he said finally. We are what we do after the impact. He lived long, quietly, with his own. Sometimes young pilots came to him, no longer of war, of peace, asked to tell. He began simply. "It was in 43. I thought the sky was my job. Turned out, my exam." They listened as one listens to weathered stone. Few colors, much truth. One of his last evenings, the snow again fell thick, rare, like feathers. He stepped onto the porch, stood, and it seemed to him the forest again stretched its branches toward him, not to hold, but to say goodbye. He smiled at that strange feeling, then went back into the house, where it smelled of soup and bread, where on the table lay an old watch with new glass and an old cigarette case without tobacco, sat down, adjusted his shoulder, and went on talking with children who were almost no longer children. His story is not about a miracle, as people like to say. It is about precision, about how sometimes the world gives you millimeters, and if you place your palms right, those millimeters add up to a life. About how people who can set shoulders are more important than medals. About how the forest is not the enemy of the sky, but its neighbor. And about how falling is not the end, but a form of path. He often repeated one phrase heard only by those who sat very close. The earth always waits for us back. The question is how we return to it. And each time, when in winter snow lay thick on the branches, he lifted his head and almost inaudibly added, "Thank you."